Happening now, we'd like to welcome our viewers from across North America and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room, episode 204 for January the 13th, 2021. And I've had some trouble, as I'm sure many of us do, getting the 21 in there as I've been making videos and recording things. So I'm sure, I've turned 50. So I actually lost my glasses today when I was out at recess throwing the Frisbee. It fell out and I couldn't find them in my classroom. I had a moment of real panic. I was like, this is a sign of the end. I can't find my glasses. So anyway, but we're not going to talk about that really. So I am the technology integration specialist and innovation specialist or something. I'm a specialist with something cool at the Cassidy School in Oklahoma City. And I used to teach Spanish, but our first semester ended on January 8th, and I am back to instructional coaching half-time. Woohoo! Although I really, really did love the chance to teach Spanish. But I am joined by someone with a very interesting map in his background, and it is the Lord of EdTech, as he's known locally in Missoula. Jason Neiffer, Dr. Neiffer, to you, ladies and gentlemen.
I've never had such an introduction.
At any time, I can make Jason laugh at the start. It's a good thing. So, welcome, Dr. Neiffer. I missed you last week, but we did have a really good reason not to meet. And wow, what times we're living through. So,
yes.
Who are you, by the way? Are you still? You've gone agrarian? It looks like you're a little agrarian farming throwback map there. I don't know what that is.
Sure. This is the 1880 Missoula, Montana perspective map. So and it's actually pretty interesting that there are a lot of these were made for a lot of towns across the United States. Chances are yours was. Looking it up is interesting. In fact, when I used to live in Helena, Montana, the state's capital, I had an 8.5 by 11 print of the Helena map, and one of the things we liked about it was our house was on that map. It was the 1890 Helena perspective map. But I had a meeting today with a former history teacher that is now the dean of the college that I work in, and the meeting was for a serious purpose, so we didn't get a chance to talk through the map, but I thought you would appreciate the map in the background. But I am, as Wes said, Jason Neiffer. I'm the assistant director and curriculum director in the Montana Digital Academy, Montana State Virtual School that happens to be located on the University of Montana campus. And yes, we had to skip last week. We apologize for the late notice to our live viewers, but history was happening. So sometimes you gotta hit the brakes and put your eyes on CNN. And I think I was up. I did not stay up for the entire vote last Wednesday. I did go to sleep. I think it was at 11 Mountain Time, which is actually pretty late for me. It wouldn't be late for 20 years ago me, but recent me, I'm in bed by 9 or 10 kind of guy. But so we apologize for our last minute poll of the show last week, but sometimes history, is takes precedent over other stuff.
It intervenes for sure.
Yes. And I think I really hope that there's nothing interesting that's going on next Wednesday, which is the inauguration, that might distract. So we'll just put it that way. We hope that day is historical for its initial purpose, and there's nothing distracting that might take us away from our solemn duty to give you the EdTech news. But hey, this isn't politics, although it will creep into our show tonight, I believe. Wes, what is the EdTech Situation Room all about?
We are here to encourage everyone to go get vaccinated as soon as you can. No, we are going to talk about technology news. We will probably talk about some conspiracy theory and the ways in which social media is playing an increasing role in shaping the perceptions and actions of folks in our society. But the main purpose is for Jason and I just basically to get to hang out and talk tech news. And this week we have actually prepared for a prediction show. So if you want to see the links at edtechsr.com/links, which by the way is now a full SSL website. I'm probably the last person running WordPress sites in the world to get that all figured out. But yes, we're full SSL. So our search engine optimization, I'm sure, is going to go through the roof, and we will just be, probably deluged with all kinds of visitors in the upcoming weeks? Probably not. But yeah, we're going to talk about news, and we're going to talk about some predictions, and it just really kind of depends on where we want to go. So Jason's got a bunch of predictions he wrote down. I, jotted some down, and there are, of course, some breaking news and new things that have kind of come in, and we'll just kind of see how that goes. But the links are there. So Dr. Neiffer, where shall we begin tonight? Would you like to start with predictions, or where do you want to go?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do predictions. And I think this year, we've done this in the past. I was going to go look for some of these, and I wasn't able to immediately find them. But I think it would be fun that looking forward to December 2021, that we should go back and take a look at a few of these to see how we did. But let me just start off with one that I think is an interesting discussion point for schools, but despite what you may be hearing in the media and maybe what your experiences are with distance or remote learning, it's not been a universal negative for kids or for students, because there are a lot of schools and districts that I think are doing a really outstanding job at delivering this. And to be clear, I think everyone's doing the best that they can. In fact, I heard an analogy last night that I think is pretty apt. That teaching remotely, especially if you're new to this, is like preparing a Thanksgiving dinner every day of the week. Like, it's so intensive. And if you're not used to these platforms, or if you're not able to get kids engaged, or the thousand of other reasons why this is more complicated than teaching face-to-face, if that's intervening, I think that's understandable. But I do think that distance learning will continue to grow as a viable option for students, or need or want that model after the pandemic. And I'll tell you, we are in the middle of surveying our students right now, as we do every semester at MTDA. We do what we call a student perception survey. It's based on the really outstanding Colorado student perception survey, which happens to be an open source survey tool, by the way. It's been very well vetted and validated from a statistical standpoint. It's a really outstanding tool, and we adapted it for distance learning and offer a student perception survey. And the overall results are the second best semester that we've done since we started giving the student perception survey out 5 years ago. And we're really proud of that number, because we didn't change all that much to serve a significantly larger number of students this semester. And, I know that there is some controversy behind distance learning. I will tell you that I very appreciate my program's model. We're a state virtual school. We're a public institution. We serve students through their local Montana public school. And, one of the questions that I got asked when I was being initially recruited to take the job as curriculum director of my state virtual school was that, what kind of kids do you serve? Like, who benefits from a distance learning program? And I did have 2 or 3 students, like actual students that I had as a instructor when I taught in a history and social studies classroom, that our program would have been a real blessing for, because there are students in unique circumstances. But the thing that I've always felt interesting about my job is that I could have articulated 3 or 4 scenarios in 2010. I can't count on my fingers and toes times 100 the number of scenarios that we have been encountering with students and their parents over the past 11 years that we've existed, that really needed access to high quality student-centered distance learning. And people that talk about whether it's better or worse than face-to-face classrooms, I've read accounts in the media when talking about initial remote learning last March and April about people misquoting research that distance learning is always a worse option than face-to-face learning. And I'm here to tell you that's just not true, that there's good and bad face-to-face learning, there's good and bad distance learning, and you can work out a viable model that works for a lot of students in a lot of different circumstances. So this pandemic's going to be over. I feel like we're starting to see some light. Right? Vaccinations are rolling out. People are getting vaccinated. We are starting to work on the end game for COVID-19. But I do think that after this is all over with, there will be an increased interest among students and parents to have options available for students to do distance or online learning.
My only addition to that is that I think, it behooves all of us to consider the positive lessons learned and just positive experiences that many of us have had during this pandemic. It's been hard, it's been tough, but there have been some really good things that have happened. We just returned from Christmas break for a week of remote, and that gave everyone a chance to quarantine and hopefully show symptoms and then not come back to school with COVID. And there's a lot of really good things that have been shown. So if you're not in the process of doing that this spring, I think that's a great activity, whether it's individual or it's something you do with colleagues at school, is to really look at the things that have been beneficial and the things that you may want to continue after it's all said and done. All right, so I'll go with my next prediction. Mine has to do with China and U.S. relations. So, one of the benefits and things I appreciate as far as us being able to do the show is that it gives us this opportunity to, not only kind of go through headlines, but, really try to put things together like, okay, so what does this mean, and trends, and we'll kind of have these little categories of things that we'll talk about. We've talked about China a whole lot. And so my prediction is that U.S. and China relations are going to basically continue to be challenged by technology interoperability issues, forcing nations to choose between either Chinese or U.S. European network infrastructure, thinking about 5G, but also other elements of network infrastructure. One of the things we've talked about on the show is that politics, I think, have made it really challenging to really be able to discern how much of this is genuine security and how much is politics. And it's a mix, of course, of both, I think. But I think that the way we see the Biden administration respond to China and the security threats is going to be pretty interesting. There have been some incredible, and I don't even know if we got to talk much about SolarWinds. Maybe we did at the end of the year. But I mean, there's incredible stuff that's been happening that people have become aware of. They've been going on for months. So anyway, I hope that it doesn't lead to a fractured internet where we don't have a truly global internet. I think it's really important that we do. We are all human beings. We all share, I believe, universal rights that are not endowed by our geography or our, bank accounts or, the country in which we happen to live at the moment. Of course, we know practically as governments do have different rights that they, protect and enforce and things like that. But anyway, I think that a global internet is really important as we continue to move forward in human history, and that this is going to be a challenge because it's a challenge now. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out with the new Biden administration and the ways in which technology intersects with relations between China and the United States.
Yep, absolutely. So the next one that I think is almost a foregone conclusion, but ARM processors are going to dominate 2021. And I will say kind of a follow-up of my, probably a bit self-aggrandizing technology choices over the last month. But in the last 2 weeks, I've not only become an iPhone user. So here is my iPhone 10s, which... or XS, 10s, whatever it is. It's I bought a used one on Swappa, and I love it. I mean, I guess there's no other way to describe it. And I will make one nerdy note about that. I am not ready for an Apple Watch yet, but what I did figure out is that, and I mentioned this a year or two ago, my old Pebble watch, which the Pebble Alliance firmware, which is Pebble doesn't exist anymore. It was bought out by Fitbit, which was bought out by Google. It doesn't exist anymore, but I have this used Pebble watch that you can download a special firmware for, and it's what I use to monitor my blood sugar 24 hours a day. That's the reason why I wear a smartwatch, is because it shows me my blood sugar. And it works great on my Apple Watch, which is super awesome. And then thank you, on my iPhone. And this is my Mac Pro, I'm sorry, my MacBook Pro M1. So,
and what do you think?
It's holy dog fast. Like, I am shocked at how responsive it is. I have not had a new MacBook. Actually, it's been 7 or 8 years since I've had a new MacBook. I had a used one that was a castaway from a former employee in my office at work that I was using for a little while. not everything works on it yet. The one example of something that's been a real bear for me is that the Google Stream file system does not work yet. So Google Drive Stream file system doesn't work yet at all, on either through Rosetta or through native. They're working on it. I did put a message out on the Google education admin forum, and there's confirmation they're working on it. So that means it can't be a daily driver for me yet, but it is really fast, like impressively fast. And the battery life on it hasn't been below 80% yet. And I haven't plugged it in since I got it last week. So, and I've worked on it an hour or two a day in the last week. So that's pretty impressive. But the thing that unifies these two platforms is an ARM-based processor. Apple processors, Apple Silicon, as it's oftentimes referred to, are ARM-based processors. And there is a movement afoot. It's happening right now at the kind of online CES that's happening in Las Vegas with ARM-based Chromebooks. It's happening at Microsoft, although they've been working on ARM for 7 or 8 years and haven't really nailed it yet, but Microsoft is working on it. And you're going to see that Intel processors are going to lose out to 2 different styles of processors. One of them are the ARM-based processors, which they come in a variety of names. MediaTek is a popular one for cheap Android phones. It's also a popular chipset for Chromebooks. Microsoft will probably develop its own ARM-based processor to use in their version, and then of course the stuff that Apple's doing. And I think you're going to start seeing devices, even inexpensive devices, that come with wickedly long battery lives and a very snappy, responsive interface. And it's going to leave Intel, I think, in the dust. And so I think we really are about to start a new hardware renaissance, and I'm very excited about the prospect.
It's almost like Intel's the new Kodak. They just haven't innovated with the way the market has shifted, and they risk obsolescence if drastic measures aren't taken.
Yep.
All right. So my next prediction, we have called the tech correction. So this is something we talked a lot about. The way I'm phrasing this is that a constituency and agenda will coalesce further around regulation and limitations of social media companies, increasing liability and extending mandated collaboration standards and requirements for content moderation and censorship. One of the things I learned about in the last week or so is called the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism. I'm sure they're very active right now. And it is something that is developing essentially digital fingerprints for media. So images and video. Think, 2 years ago with the New Zealand live stream of the terrorist, truck driving attack that was still spread on social media, rampantly, and was terrible. But really pointed to the need for platforms to be collaborating and having algorithmic capacity to be able to identify these clips and to be able to take them down. So, on this note, I'll mention a couple headlines. As probably most of us know, President Trump was removed from Facebook and from Twitter, and the response also on Parler, which was the very much more conservative response to Twitter, social media wise, was that not only were they removed from the app stores by Apple and Google, but Amazon went ahead and kicked them out of the Amazon cloud, which meant they had no place to go. So it's a radically different environment with respect to the tech correction today in terms of, of course, what did it take for that to happen is pretty tragic and terrible. But this isn't just a United States situation. This is global. And so the 2 articles that I actually dropped into the bottom, we got all our predictions on our edtechsr.com/links if you want to go check these out. I put this under tech correction. New York Times, January 13th. Uganda, this is today, blocks Facebook ahead of contentious election. And then it was preceded 2 days ago by BBC News. Facebook shuts down government-linked accounts. So the short of it is there's there is an election that has somebody's been in power for a long time, and I shouldn't say someone, I should know the name of this president, but the president there has been in power for a long time. The elections have not been held apparently in a fair and open way. And so accounts have been blocked by Facebook, who is becoming much more activist, or I don't know exactly what words we would use for that, but much more proactive. And of course, they face all kinds of criticism all over the world, not just in the United States, for their inaction in the past when it comes to disinformation and outright lying. And so they blocked accounts of the government, and then the government's response was, oh, fine, we're just going to shut Facebook down completely in the entire country. So this kind of sparring between governments and social media companies is going to increase. And I think that we're going to see some kind of a coalition emerge and some more specifics beyond just people complaining about Section 230 of the what's it, Communications Decency Act. Was that it, or the communication? I'm not going to rattle that off perfectly. So yeah, the tech correction, it's a thing. It's going to continue, and I think we're going to see it mature in some new ways, not just as a result of the events on January 6th in our nation's capital, but as a result of a whole array of things that not only have happened in the United States, but that are happening around the world.
Right. Well, and what I will add to the tech correction note that you made, Wes, is that the other piece of this is that social media platforms, over a dozen of them, have banned President Trump from their I guess airwaves is probably the broad way to put that. The one I thought was most interesting was Pinterest kicked Trump off last week, so that will be a very craftless retirement for President Trump. He will also not be able to find any crockpot recipes, so that is indeed a problem there. But the thing that's really interesting about this is that I think it's going to push forward a lot of conversations about these platforms and about the good and or bad of social media, but we're still not going to see any regulation on this, right? Like, even if they got rid of 231 or whatever the Communications Decency Act piece is, like that's not. I mean, it doesn't fix anything, right? Like, it doesn't provide I mean, it may make individual platforms more responsible, but if anything, we have a broader problem than that, and we don't have any meaningful framework for regulation at this point.
What's interesting is that even though Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act allegedly would relieve our platforms of all liability, in fact, that's not what is happening in terms of the ways in which the companies have responded. So you really, I heard a fantastic, I'll try to put this in the show notes, interview that Kara Swisher, I think, of the New York Times, did with the president and founder of Parler. I think it was right before. No, it was after Wednesday. So you simply can't have a platform today that you don't moderate at all. And that was the message from Google, from Amazon, from Apple. We tend to think of Apple as having the most tightly guarded, app store, but everyone responded to this. And so when it comes to hate speech, to incitements of violence, to child pornography, and many other things that we would not even probably want to say what they are, let's just say really bad stuff, platforms, they face consequences even with Section 230 in place and the current regime that we have. So I agree with you, Jason, that repealing Section 230 isn't going to just be some kind of a magic bullet like some people have portrayed it to be. We don't seem to have agreement about what that regulation would be, but man, it is. I mean, I think we're just kind of holding our breaths to make it through January 20th. But what is going to come next in terms of calls for accountability? I think that these platforms and like, for instance, with Facebook's actions in Uganda, as well as here in the United States, I mean, platforms I think are stepping up. We have truly unleashed kind of a chimera. I mean, kind of it is the age of disinformation. It's the attention economy, and the age of surveillance capitalism, but the age of disinformation is upon us, and its effects are being vividly seen. And so it's not unreasonable to think that we're going to have a variety of responses, not only from states in the United States and from Congress, but also, Europe and other kinds of countries. So it's going to be pretty interesting because, nobody can predict the future, but there's going to be a tech correction. There is one underway, but nobody can really tell you exactly what that's going to look like in another year, as we're hopefully, I hope, sitting here pontificating and thinking about the 2021 year to be, which is hopefully a lot better than 2020 was in many ways.
Right. Absolutely. Okay, Wes, what else do you got on your predictions?
Okay. Let's see. My next one is, I have a few more, I think, than you. I did a media literacy one. So this one is, disinformation and conspiracy theories will continue to be weaponized to subvert democratic governments. Teachers will be asked to address these issues through civics education. COVID vaccination efforts worldwide will be significantly impeded by anti-vax misinformation. Now, I really hope that's not true. That proves not to be true. But, I think we lost 4,200 human beings in the United States today to COVID. Can you imagine that? I mean, how many airplanes would that be, crashing and everyone alive dying? Over 4,000 people. So I'm hearing less of the anti-vax noise, and I'm gonna guess that the platforms are stepping up to that, as well as calls for violence and disinformation as well. So that's prediction number 3.
Yep. I would add another twist to that too, to say that related to the tech correction, every time we kind of play whack-a-mole with these new media sources, new social media platforms, new ways of disseminating information, it makes it that much more complex to teach information literacy, but more importantly, it's that much more complicated to be an information consumer. And we had talked about previously, I actually created an account on Parler. It wasn't really for politics. I was more curious than anything else. My academic curiosity got to me. But then more importantly, I was also interested in who was on there, right? Especially in my kind of local region. And so Parler's gone now. We don't know if Parler's coming back or not. My guess is at some point they'll be able to find someone that will host them. There's a large international marketplace for web hosting. I have no doubt that they could probably put the platform back up. By the way, if you haven't seen some of the articles related to this, one of the reasons why one of the groups that moved away from them vendor-wise was not only the attorneys for Parler, their attorney firm dropped them. So they were also utilizing a free trial of some service that.
So it was an SSO thing that would let them let folks log in with like Google or 365 or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, and
they were on a free trial.
Yeah, and the free trial, they ended it early because they're like, yeah, we're not interested in continuing business with you. Bizarre, right? But still, that's the way it is. But the internet can be a hidden location, right? Like if we push people underground, they will find underground ways to get together and to organize. And there was I wish I'd grabbed a link this morning. There were a number of articles in this morning's mainstream news that said that discussions about next Wednesday's inauguration have been pushed into much deeper arenas in the internet. And I do worry that. I'm not saying that it calls into question decisions that various companies have made in the last week regarding that. But what I would say is that if we keep banning places where people go, that they will be in increasingly obscure places to go. And I think that does create that much more of a fractured a landscape, not only to find information, right? Because if we say that the abandonment of Fox News in the last couple of weeks has been super interesting, right? Because upstart new networks that no one even knew about 4 or 5 years ago, the One American News Network is an example of this, is now the mainstream, right? And Fox News is not with that audience anymore. So I don't really know where I'm going with that, other than to say the media literacy component of education, it must continue its work unabated.
So a couple thoughts. We're in the midst of our conspiracy theory unit in the second trimester for my 6th grade media literacy class. And today's lesson, we were watching a video by a filmmaker arguing why we couldn't have faked the moon landings. And we were focusing a lot on the Apollo moon landings and the idea that they're fake. But we're asking the question, I mean, how do you decide who to believe, what to believe? How do you determine, look at sources? These are incredibly important skills. And to that point, Jason, about, if people go other places, and we've talked about encryption on the show a lot and how important it is, but also how, that is a detriment to law enforcement. And, the Patriot Act is an example of some legislation that had some sweeping changes with respect to U.S. law that, was pushed through after 9/11. I would hope that we're not going to have events that would rival what happened on January 6th. And that there would be some kind of responsive legislation, but that's in the arena of possibility. If, let's say, folks organize using Telegram, Signal, other kinds of encrypted technologies. But what is really significant about dealing with the mainstream technologies like Facebook, I mean, yes, anybody can download Tor, anybody could get on the dark web, but as a statistic, how many folks are? I think one of the biggest scary things and things that just have been highlighted by current events is, we really do, I think, have folks living in different worlds of facts because of the information streams. And frankly, I'll just say it, because our president from the past 4 years has really spewed an incredible amount of disinformation and lies, to continue to say that he's lost this election and it's fraudulent. And I mean, that's one of the most recent ones. It's really bore some bitter fruit. And I don't think, grandma, grandpa, a lot of internet users are going to be running the Tor browser and installing Telegram and, getting their news from these subterranean sources like they have from, let's say, Facebook or Twitter. It's going to be super, super interesting. So we are, we're living through history, and I think we're living through a history that I don't know of any of who imagined it was going to be this dark, actually. All right, you want to do another one? Or you want me to take another one? I've got a Google one. I think you may be muted, actually. Did you inadvertently mute? You did.
I did, and isn't that a 2021 meme? So speaking of, it's the perfect segue. So obviously we're starting to see the beginning of the end of COVID, right? Vaccinations are getting scheduled. I have a number of friends in the medical and also teaching community that have either received the vaccine or are scheduled to receive the vaccine. I am a 1B'er in Montana. Our governor reconfigured us a bit, and 1B will start next week in Montana. It's county by county, so I don't know if it'll be next week or the week after, but I am likely to see a vaccine dose soon, which I cannot begin to explain how thrilled I am about that. It means that at some point I can start reliving my life as normal again. But Wes, you mentioned this earlier. We've learned a lot of lessons that relate to EdTech, I think, in the pandemic. But one of them that I think is pretty important, and I hope we don't abandon these technologies when the pandemic ends. But video conferencing is very mainstream now, right? Like it for better or for worse, it's all called Zooming, even though Zoom is but one technology. But chances are in your district you probably have access now to Zoom or Teams or Google Meets, or perhaps you have another third party a piece of software, or maybe you were just even using Skype and to some better effect during the pandemic. And I have to say, that I feel fairly connected to a lot of people because I'm able to get on with them in video conferencing. It's not just, we use StreamYard here, but our show has gone on without impact since COVID-19 started. If it wasn't for a video conference like technology, I wouldn't get this opportunity to speak with Wes for an hour every week. It's an hour that's important to me to connect with a friend and colleague, and this wouldn't exist. And I've had dinner with my sister and her family 3 states away. I've had virtual happy hours with colleagues 1, 2, 5, 10 states away. A lot of meetings that shouldn't really have been face-to-face meetings were easily taken care of with a quick 10 to 20 minute Zoom. And I am the first to admit that we can't get rid of face-to-face culture, right? Like, I'm not saying we should all just hide in our homes and get on Teams or Zoom calls. But I really do hope that we will take this opportunity of prolifically available, pretty high quality video conferencing technology and utilize it. To bring more people in from the community into school board meetings, to allow more people to testify in committees at legislatures, to allow more public participation in city and county commission meetings, to broadcast more school events, concerts, and sports events and debate tournaments, having students from across the nation. I've judged now 3 virtual debate tournaments in the last a couple of months. It's not a replacement for face-to-face tournaments. It is a wonderful opportunity, though, to very inexpensively, without the sometimes ugh of bus travel and middle-of-the-night bus rides on icy Montana roads, to get kids from long distances away at least an opportunity to engage with one another. So my prediction is, and maybe it's as much of a hope than it is a prediction, that we don't abandon these wonderful technologies just because we're tired of them when this is all over with. And let me assure everyone, Tuesday is my Zoom meeting day. I call it Zoomsday, which rhymes with Doomsday at our organization. It's kind of become an internal meme that we refer to Tuesday as Zoomsday. It's tiring for me too, right? But when everything goes back to normal, we have an opportunity to be in each other's face-to-face environment. I hope we don't get rid of technology's opportunities to bring us together without the expense of travel. And not saying against travel, because let me assure you, I'll be the first to buy an airline ticket when it's safe for me to do so. But I do hope that we continue to utilize these technologies.
Amen, and absolutely. On the note of technologies, I just saw, as I logged into StreamYard tonight, that Hopin, Hopin, has acquired them. I watched about 90-second little video that one of the StreamYard founders had said. They started 2 years ago with 2 folks. Then they've gone up to 20 employees. Now they're joining Hopin, or if I'm saying it right, Hopin. It's Hopin. It's Hopin.com, which is a company that has 300 people. But they're growing by leaps and bounds. Hopin is even growing faster than StreamYard, and StreamYard's been growing really fast. So yes, amen, and absolutely. I mean, I want to come to the Mountain Moot in person. You can't taste the beer in Montana from Oklahoma when you're tuned in virtually. So I'm looking forward to that. The other thing I'll say on that note is I'll drop this link. I'll drop a link to the tweet into the live stream and put it on our show notes. Ethan Zuckerman, who's at now the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, is with the Institute for Digital Public Infrastructure, and I really love his podcast called Reimagining the Internet. And he had a great interview with Talia Stroud, which was, I think, maybe back from September or maybe October. But she's with a group called Civic Signals, and it's called Reimagining the Internet. And so, to your point, Jason, about how we need to think about how we are using these tools to increase civic participation, to extend opportunities for learning, but also for just being involved and aware of what's happening in our communities and being good citizens. I really, really like the thinking and the work that Ethan is doing and others around. I mean, think about, you've talked about comments in the local paper's website. It's become just a place where you just can't even, comments just basically need to be turned off because there's so much vitriol, and what is allowed and perhaps even encouraged in terms of what's liked and rises to the top is oftentimes the most emotional, the most, in your face, ugly kind of comments. And they're talking on that podcast and with the kinds of folks they're bringing together about the ways that digital platforms can be architected to not do what they're doing now in terms of the ugliness. And I think we want to continue on a technology standpoint as educational technology users and advocates to push platforms to meet our needs in education even better, right? Because Zoom wasn't designed explicitly just for education. There's phenomenal improvements that have been made. This last week when we were remote, I used Google breakout rooms and Google Meet breakout rooms every lesson. It was fantastic. And I really think that those kinds of changes and adjustments to platforms can continue, and they will continue. And I think that there's a lot of really good skills that we have learned and acquired in a much larger numbers and in a faster pace than we would have without the pandemic. And I also think that a lot of these things are potentially good whether we've got a pandemic or not, in terms of the affordances it gives us for interaction and learning, and not being constrained in the same ways that we always are with face-to-face instruction.
Absolutely. Well, Wes, I think I am out of predictions, but I will.
You got number 5. You didn't do your 5th one, did you?
I kind of snuck it into an earlier one.
You stuck it in?
Okay. Yeah, information landscape. I will make one more prediction. I do not think that. I don't think we're going to be able to, until the end of this year, have full face-to-face conferences in a way that is going to have people be confident to be able to attend them. And I know that ISTE plans to be face-to-face this summer in San Antonio. DLAC, the Digital Learning Annual Conference, which is my favorite conference now, is going to be in Austin in June. They are going to do a hybrid. They're accepting proposals for both a face-to-face and online conference. So they're kind of hedging their both directions, because I have a sense that that's part of how conference economics works. I just don't think 2021 is going to see a mass return to there. If for no other reason, then I know it's still very complicated to fly in the United States. I have friends that do travel as part of their job, and did take 3 or 4 months off from that traveling, but we're back in the air in later 2020. And I've heard stories of, that flights don't really mean anything, that oftentimes scheduled flights wouldn't take off because they didn't have enough people to run the flight. And I think that's going to make things complicated. So I will say that I don't think there's going to be a mass return to large events quite yet in 2021.
I am contemplating an iPad media camp that might focus on family oral history and community history to be up in Cody, Wyoming, maybe in July. And I've actually sent in a message today, and I've got relatives up there. If we could get the right space, if we could be socially distanced, if we can follow precautions. I mean, one of the lessons I think we've had directly at our school is that, when everyone is required to wear a mask all the time, and, we socially distance and we move desks apart, and we take all the care we can, we have not had COVID tear through the school and shut everything down. I think most of the positives have happened, outside of school. A lot of it's been athletics when students haven't worn masks. And anyway, it's going to be interesting. But I think you're probably right. I think there will be some return to some face-to-face things. We've got every 3-year family reunion that's supposed to happen this summer. I don't think it's going to happen, especially because a lot of the folks that go to that are older. But perhaps for 2022, we'll have a little more return to normalcy for that. Let me put one in. I moved this one up in my list. I don't think I'll do all mine, but I'll put this one as number 4. This is a security one. So as you know, if you've listened to the show, Jason is a wonderful walk the walk with security guy when it comes to passwords and going through his repeated passwords and weak passwords and all that kind of stuff. So My security prediction is that hacks, identity theft, ransomware, and password breaches, this again isn't like revolutionary, will continue in frequency and magnitude. Password security, multi-factor authentication, and password managers will continue to grow in importance. And so I think that hopefully those of us that are on the show, listening to the show, part of our community, you've heard us say enough times, password manager, password manager, password manager, that is something that you've made part of your daily routine, and that you're also sharing that with others. Because, how do people get that information? It's by people in their circle of trust, folks that they know. And so whether it's parents or relatives, friends, these are things that we need to be sharing. The SolarWinds hack was really just crazy, and you want to stop this arc, right? This arc of it's the biggest one ever. It's the worst one we've ever seen, Nobody wants to be a victim of identity theft or have to deal with those kinds of issues. And so as cybercrime continues, because it is not going to go away, we all need to be encouraging each other to follow best practices when it comes to our passwords and our security.
Absolutely. Well, Wes, shall we do a little bit of news?
Sure. Yeah, let's do.
We're just a couple minutes away from the top of the hour, but there were a couple of interesting stories. First and foremost, a follow-up, I guess, is probably the best way to describe this. We talked a little bit about a couple of times in December, Apple's new privacy nutrition labels, which, by the way, awesome. I really like them. I did look at every app I installed on my fresh iPhone. I will say it did give me an opportunity when I transferred everything over from Android. There's an Apple app on Android that allows you to transfer everything over. They did offer to install all the apps I had installed on my Android phone on my iPhone, and I chose not to do that because I wanted to kind of be fresh and new. And I looked at all the privacy policies, but there was a very interesting article in Fast Company that talks to an ex-Apple engineer and says that the weakness of that, I mean, it's great. Like I don't want to diminish Apple's really triumphant privacy policy to share that information with you as an end user. But one important note is that it relies on self-disclosure by the app manufacturers. And so when an app developer puts an app in the app store, they're the ones that check off what they're using their information for, and sometimes they provide context and sometimes they don't. My suspicion, my prediction is that Apple at some point will step this up a little bit, because my guess is that overly intrusive apps have now an incentive to lie, since no one seems to be checking this. So I think at some point there will be an additional process there, but I think that's an important caveat what we talked about in the past, which is the Apple privacy nutrition labels. And quick question to you, Wes. I mean, you are obviously an iPhone user, use iOS and iPad OS. Have you looked at any of these labels? Has that been a part of your process in adopting new apps at this point?
I haven't actually downloaded that many new apps lately. I think a couple weeks ago on the show, and maybe that had just happened, there were some pretty eye-opening screenshots. I think it was the Facebook app, actually. So that's really the limit of what I have looked at and seen so far. But it is a good step forward, and it also shows how Apple can kind of make the world move too. It's interesting to see platforms respond and sort of like who's going to be first to do these things. I think we kind of had a tipping point for sure in terms of assertive bans of politicians and things like that on platforms. I think the move to more disclosure with privacy is a really good move. And even with that, of course, we'll have watchdog groups, bloggers, the whole ecosystem. I'm sure that probably the EdTech Situation Room is not the only podcast that you're listening to if that regards technology. If you're listening to us, there's a whole ecosystem of professionals who are making their living doing this, as Jason and I are not. They'll continue to kind of serve in a watchdog role for that.
Absolutely. And then one other article I want to highlight, and just because it'll be interesting, because I know there's going to be a lot of media in the next couple of months with new phone releases. Great article from the Android Authority on January 7th. I'm sorry, January 10th, 2021 probably will be the year of the less expensive cell phone. In other words, we're starting to see prices for cell phones kind of come into check, and a lot of flagship phone makers, not the least of which is Apple. Samsung is committed in this direction as well, that they're looking to try to make phones a bit more of a reasonable purchase. And I have to say, I've been going with cheaper Android phones in the last 3 or 4 years. I've not had a flagship phone in a long time. I did buy a 2-year-old used iPhone was my purchase. I bought it on Swappa for about a half of what it was featured for retail, which still was a substantial price. I think I paid like $370 for this thing. I hope to get a year or two out of this, or get a good trade-in at some point for a more modern, it's only 2 years old, a newer edition iPhone, perhaps from T-Mobile, because they have great deals 3 or 4 times a year. But I do think that the $1,000, $1,200, $1,500 cell phone, I don't think it's on its way out, but I do think that there is a commitment, I think, on to big tech to make more reasonable priced phones for the masses.
I will drop in an article that is just fantastic, and this will also be a shout out for the book. The book is called Like War, and I'm not quite finished with it. I tend to read a bunch of books at the same time, and I'm not being very fast with this. But one of the co-authors of Like War, Emerson T. Brooking, wrote an article that he shared on Medium on January 7th. And the title of this is Op-Ed for Right-Wing Extremists, This Was a Victory. And again, this was a January 7th article that followed the events in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. The ways in which social media allows for the amplification of extremist perspectives and can be used for recruitment. Oh gosh, I don't know if we talked about this on the show. Did we talk about how that podcast from the New York Times, Caliphate, actually turned out that the guy didn't go to Syria and do what he did? I don't think we.
No.
Yes, that he's Canadian, and that led to that person who had put that podcast together to step down from the New York Times. And as real media and journalism organizations do, it was recanted, and the New York Times came clean about this. It wasn't like a hidden thing. But yeah, the Canadian government and anyway, I don't know the entire story, but security forces, because they had folks in, the parliament in Canada saying, what is this guy doing? He was in Syria, participating in these atrocious acts, because this podcast had these interviews with him, and it turned out that his stuff just wasn't corroborated, and it ended up being poor journalism, and it was very, what's the right word? Almost prurient, if that's the right word, in a way that, as far as the violence and the insight that it gave into just this crazy era of the rise of ISIS and everything. So anyway, it made me think of that, because part of the issues with the tech correction, there's a lot of them, but it has had to do with the rise of extremist groups, of racist white nationalist groups, other groups that are, very much on the political fringe, using YouTube, using platforms to get their message out and to recruit and to draw folks down a rabbit hole. So I think this was a great article by Emerson Brooking, and I commend it to you. And I also definitely commend that book, Like War, because, folks, there is an ongoing war happening through technology. And at some level, I think it's important for us as citizens to be aware of it. And I think it's important for us as teachers, and that civic side of how do we encourage media literacy? How do we develop the capacity for not just kids, but everyone, adults too, to vet sources and to determine who you're going to trust and believe. There's also that larger regulatory level about, maybe we're going to have greater investment in public media. The BBC, for instance, in the United Kingdom receives, I think, a lot of government support. PBS, really, I don't know how much they do receive. They receive some, but there's a lot of sides to this. And I think that we need to be aware of the potential roles which we can play. And, that's just the level of threat and the seriousness of like what's going on. I think it's probably creeped up on a lot of people, and we become numb to these headlines about this hack and this breach and those kind of things. And so we've all got roles to play, and we need to try to help each other stay safe. But we also need to promote media literacy and promote hopefully good critical thinking. Some things that have been transcendent, we've been trying to do forever in schools in terms of helping people think for themselves and be independent, and not just be brought along by the crowd, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that the seriousness of all this, certainly dramatized in a way visually for the world that it hadn't been before January 6th. And again, we hope and pray that we will have a peaceful transition of power. And I saw those pictures of, National Guardsmen sleeping in the halls of the Capitol, and, going to, I'm sure, do everything that they can in their power to try to promote a peaceful inauguration. But man, what a roller coaster ride. So, and how do we talk about it when things are so polarized? That's an important question as well. So we promise not to talk too much about the political issues, but living in these times, it's going to be impossible to not talk about COVID. It's going to be impossible not to talk about, social media platforms and the ways in which they're impacting our thinking in our society. So,
yep, absolutely.
All right. Do we have any Geeks of the Week this week?
I do. Let me share a quick one. This is geeky in a whole different way. I tend to, obsess on stuff a little bit here and there, and I'll tell you one of my kind of longer term obsessions that has gone in a different direction as of late. I love cast iron. I think cast iron is amazing cookware. And my wife and I received an ancient cast iron pan for our wedding in 2004 from friends of the family. And I didn't know much about cast iron then, and I slowly and surely became more versed in it. And now it's my preferred cookware. But in the last couple of years, I've also really got into enameled cast iron. The Le Creuset French pan is probably the most popular. Allison's mom bought it. My wife's mom bought us one for Christmas. This was 10, 12 years ago. Well, a couple of years ago, I was staying in an Airbnb somewhere, and I can't remember. It could have been Eastern Washington, which I do visit a lot and stay at Airbnbs, but I saw a kind of a vintage looking pan called Descoware, and I did more and more research on Descoware and found out that it was actually a Belgian, vintage Belgian cast iron pan. It looked very European, and I loved it. It was orange. And so about 6 months ago, I had found the note that I wrote in a notebook that said Descoware, and I looked, and I bought a piece of it on Amazon. And that's been a rabbit hole for me. And now I am on the lookout for vintage enameled cast iron. But the point is that there's so many ways to be geeky. Why just stop at computers, right? And there's a great website. It's called castironcollector.com, where you can learn more about vintage cast iron. Again, this is geeky-tastic, but hey, that's why we're here. So castironcollectorwes.com.
Maybe you can drop the link to that pan that you were talking about. Alexander, our son's gift to me for my birthday last summer, was a porcelain, covered or enameled, whatever, Dutch oven inside.
Mm-hmm. Love it.
Interior use, and I'm loving it. I enjoy cooking on it all the time. So my Geek of the Week is a podcast, and so I'll drop in the link to the Pocket Share for link to this, but this is on the World Affairs podcast. Love this podcast. So many amazing interviews. This is from December 12th, 2020, and it's entitled Larry Brilliant and Peter Hotez Vaccinating Our Way Out of the Pandemic. And Larry Brilliant is Dr. Larry Brilliant, known best for eradicating smallpox. Talks about how important global cooperation is. Just a really great, sort of insider behind the scenes look at how pandemics in the past have been conquered, and, speaking to the importance of education and combating disinformation, but then also just the march of science, and just really an inspiring and amazing podcast that I enjoyed a lot. And if you don't subscribe to the World Affairs and you at all are interested in global issues and political science, it's a great podcast.
Wonderful. Well, Wes, I think you're supposed to ask me this.
It's all right, man. You can step up. You are the map man, though. I'm gonna have to get me some maps on my background. Although, you're on your PC still, right? So you're using that fancy Windows machine background.
I am.
Yeah.
Although my backgrounds are popular enough in various means I go to. I'm gonna have to find a way to do this on the Mac. So I'll figure it out. And report back to you.
That sounds good. Yes. So, where are you, Jason, when you're not on the EdTech Situation Room on Wednesday nights?
Best place to find me is on Twitter, TechSavvyTeach. And hey, next week we are opening up registration for the 50th annual Northwest Council for Computer Education Conference, March 17th through 20th, online. So please come join us this year online, next year back in Seattle. One of the best conferences where you'll meet the nicest people and get a really great fresh perspective on EdTech. www.ncce.org.
Awesome. And I'm on Twitter, I'm W Fryer, but just for grins, a new website and a rebooted website. I put all of my wife's mother's recipes online, and also a number of other recipes at food.wesfryer.com. And in fact, I've needed to post our broccoli and chicken casserole that we made tonight, because I hadn't actually had that one on there. And then I guess I can drop that in the chat. The other one, I haven't. This will be my first announcement, because I need to email current subscribers. But I had made my playingwithmedia.com website into a video library, but the plugin that I had used was discontinued, and I had difficulty, and it was just going to be a big project. And so anyway, playingwithmedia.com has now been rebooted. I still have hours of work to do to create some custom thumbnails for a lot of the older posts that are on there. And then I've got content actually from the past couple years in some other places. So there's some free videos there, and then it's a video subscription site that I set up and have had for a while, and it's been rebooted. I'm pretty happy with the new theme, and it's HTTPS, which, before I had links out to subscribe, anyway, payment processors, lots of fun stuff to learn. It actually can be a big headache when you end up setting up different websites, and, got to keep these things up to date. And sometimes it's nice to be able to reboot them. So if you all have tuned into the show, and we've had a few live viewers that have been here, please reach out to us. Let us know. We are usually here on Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Central Time, 8 p.m. Mountain Time, and whatever that translates to in your part of the world. But you can always find our YouTube channel. If you just search for the EdTech Situation Room, we're on Facebook, as well as Twitter, and on our website, edtechsr.com. You can find small 32 kilobit MP3s, as well as smaller 100 megabyte-ish video versions that we compress and make available via Amazon S3. And I don't think we'll be deplatformed, because we're controlling ourselves pretty well here on the show. So I want to thank Jason for joining, helping educate us about the maps of Montana. Maybe we can, if you want to send me any of those links, Jason, or just drop them in the document. Actually, if you want to, that'd be kind of cool. I wanted, especially that first one that you had was pretty cool. And so we want to thank everybody for tuning in, and please join us again on the EdTech Situation Room. Until next time, stay savvy, stay safe, and we will hopefully be joining you after a peaceful January 20th next week.
Night.